Well, welcome and good evening. This is the September 2nd, 2014 Special Redevelopment Agency meeting. Let the roll call reflect that all board members are present with the exceptions of Board Member Wicks, who has asked to be excused tonight. The first item on our agenda is the approval of minutes. The work session of March 11th, 2014, and the regular meeting of March 11th, 2014, and joint study session of June 10th, 2014. Board Member White.
Yes, I've reviewed these and found them to be accurate.
Okay, and we also have the regular meeting of June 10th, 2014, and work session of June 10th, 2014. Board Member Garner.
Yes, Chair Heyer, I've reviewed those minutes and found them to be correct to the best of my recollection.
And for the special meeting of June 17th, 2014, Board Member Stevens.
Yes, Mr. Chair, they're correct.
And the closed executive session of June 24th, 2014, and special meeting of June 24th, 2014, Board Member Blair.
Yes, I reviewed both those minutes and found them to be accurate.
And finally, the special meeting of July 29th, 2014, and work session of July 29th, 2014, Board Member Stevens.
Yes, Mr. Chair, they're correct, and I make a motion that we accept the minutes of the meetings that have been presented this evening.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion by Board Member Stevens, second by Board Member Blair for approval of the minutes. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes. And the next item is reports from the administration, amendments to agreements with Ogden 20th Street Investors, LLC. Mr. Cooper.
I guess Brandon's presenting. I thought Greg was. So.
He stood up and got ready. Looked like he was ready.
So I will actually handle the first part, the amendments, and then Greg will handle the second part. So he'll join us next. Chair Heyer, members of the board, good evening. Tonight's discussion is regarding the project at the Riverbend area with PEG Development and Ogden 20th Street Investors Group. As you recall, on May 28th of last year, land transfer and development agreement was approved by you folks. This agreement set forth the terms and conditions of the development of 17 acres that are along 20th Street between Childs and Grant, between 20th and 18th Street. As part of that agreement, there was also a secured note that was secured by a promissory or a deed of trust that was associated with the 17 acres that secured the lien interest that the RDA had for the amount of $637,188. This lien was related to the demolition that was held a year or so prior to that. And it also set forth the terms and conditions of the development of the project, which included planning approvals, zoning approvals. It required the developer to also have final written financial commitments and an executed construction contract and start construction all before November 24th of 2013. So as you know, that date has come and gone, and because of that, the LTDA was automatically terminated, and the agency actually accelerated payment of the promissory note for the amount of the $637,000 and caused to be issued a foreclosure notice. And so this set in action certain steps for them to rectify the notice of default. And that reinstatement period of that foreclosure action expired. And so the developer and the agency have been working together to reinstate that and to get back on track in terms of the future of the development. So as part of that, developer and the agency have renegotiated some of the terms of the performance deadline in the original LTDA. And so I'd like to discuss some of those modifications and talk about steps moving forward. So what is being proposed tonight in Resolution 2014-14 is the reinstatement of the LTDA as it is modified in the First Amendment. That includes the performance deadline to be extended to include a couple of different deadlines, the first being September 30th. That is the date in which the developers to obtain all final approvals for development. That's planning and zoning. If there's additional approvals there, it's the RDA approval. There's a plat recordation and things like that. So all of those things will need to happen by September 30th under the new terms of the LTDA. Also, the developers to submit the final executed construction contract for the construction of Lot 1 in the project. And that is to happen before October 7th. Developers to commence the site work that was previously approved on or before October 14th. And in addition to that, would substantially complete all of the Lot 1 improvements according to the schedule of work attached to the agreement before 18 months from the time that the subdivision plat was recorded. So essentially, they would have 18 months to finish those buildings in Lot 1. In addition to that, developer would commence construction of Lots 2 through 7, which are the townhome part of the project there along Park Boulevard. And that would need to commence 18 months from the recordation date of the subdivision and actually complete no later than 30 months from that same time period. Also, the developer commits to pursuing the completion of the remaining portion of the development, which would extend beyond the Phase 1 into the remaining 17 acres of the project. In exchange for that, the agency would agree under this proposal to partially release the trust deed liens on a rolling basis, so it's a partial reconveyance as Lot 1 gets developed. And then also it would delay the completion of the foreclosure action, which I mentioned before, as long as there's diligent and visible progress being made, not only in Phase 1, but also in Phase 2 or future phases. There's also a change in the entity in which would construct the project. The First Amendment and also the LTDA is party with Ogden 20th Street investors. They have assigned all of their rights and obligations to Ogden 20th Street Apartments. And so as part of that, we would consider, or we would consent to the transfer of all of the benefits and obligations to Ogden 20th Street Apartments LLC also, as well. And they would assume all the terms and conditions. They would be bound by the same obligations as would 20th Street investors. And then the last component there in the changes to the LTDA would be the continuous progress being made at a rolling pace. So as soon as Phase 1 was built out to 75%, then they would continue moving forward with additional phases. So in terms of risk for this project, because the deed of trust is in place, that has not been relinquished. It is still in place. And because that deed of trust is still secured by the property, then there is a chance of additional developer default. However, the lien interest that the agency holds in the property would not go away. So again, we have new dates being established by this First Amendment, and if those dates are not met, then the notice of default and the foreclosure action commences automatically. There's no notice. It would just automatically roll into those actions that are being stayed with this new amendment. So there's very little risk there. We would be in the same position that we are now in terms of default. This gives the developer a chance to re-engage the project. They, after speaking with them over the last many months, it's been clear to us that they have been able to work out some of the issues that they've had internally with some of their partners, trying to tweak the design of the buildings, also to establish bank financing. It's obvious to us that they've worked those issues out. They've made tremendous progress over the last probably 30 days in meeting some of the requirements that we've had for them regarding additional agreements and evidence of progress. And so we're comfortable with the fact that they have overcome any issues that would have caused this delay in the first place. And moving forward is in the best interest of the project and in the best interest of the developer. Again, our dates that we've established in the First Amendment are aggressive, and there is always another chance of default. However, we don't feel that at this stage in the game there's a likelihood of that based on the fact that we're here tonight, the developer's here with us. We've received evidence that they're compliant to all the requests that we've had, and they're ready to go. So that is, in general, the terms of the First Amendment to the LTDA. Any questions about that?
Questions for Mr. Cooper?
The developer knows that the foreclosure is still intact, and he's well aware of that. Is that correct?
The foreclosure action has not gone away. It is still pending, and he's aware of that, yes.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Montgomery's
Great.
turn now.
Yes, thank you.
So the second part of this consideration deals with the actual site and building elevations. And we're talking tonight about Building A, which is the 88-unit building along 20th Street. Building B, well, this is B1, which is 24 units, and Building B, which is 32 units. So Building B1 is along Grand Avenue, Building B along the vacated Childs, and then Building D at the corner. The almost a year ago, actually, it's 8 days less than a year, you had approved this project. And in January this year, the developer came back to the Planning Commission and asked for a revision of one of those conditions that had been approved back in September of 2013. What I'm going to share with you tonight are two separate actions the Planning Commission looked at. One was the January action. While the Planning Commission acted on it, the developer asked that it be delayed coming to the RDA because they felt some other revisions would be made. And then circumstances whereas came about that the delay was longer than they thought. They came back to the Planning Commission on August 7th and asked for some other revisions. So tonight you're looking at those two sets of revisions the Planning Commission has recommended to you. Back in January, the revision that was asked was to take a requirement that the Planning Commission had put on buildings B and B1 to adjust the height of the brick. The drawings that had been submitted had shown the brick being below the window sills. There's discussions that the brick really should come up to the window sill. This is what that looks like to the window sill. And as a condition of approval, this is what was required. In the construction drawings that were submitted, however, this is what was shown, and so this is what spurred the request for the amendment. As the Planning Commission discussed this, they felt that it'd be appropriate to drop the brick down below the window sill. This is about a foot and a half below that area. And in a 6-2 vote, recommended approval of this modification to have the buildings actually look like this for B and B1, to drop the brick below the window sill. The next items that then were considered by the Planning Commission in their August 7th meeting dealt with three items. The first one was regarding a requirement, let me just go back to here, the treatment of this area between B1 and A along Grand Avenue. The original approval talked about a solid brick wall between these two buildings to screen this portion of the parking lot. The general requirements in the guidelines and ordinance are that parking be screened from public view. And of course, in a lot of the area, the buildings screen the parking. Building A screens all the parking from 20th Street. From Child's area, these two buildings screen the parking. But there is an area here that was visible to the public on Grand Avenue, so the screening requirement was in place. Again, the requirement was that it be a brick wall, and brick wall would actually tie into a dumpster that was located here. The developers came back and requested the Planning Commission consider a revision that would take that area, still retain the brick wall where the dumpster is, but then plant a privet hedge on either side of that area to screen, again, the parking lots. This is a view of what that looks like. Now, just to give you an idea of what a privet hedge looks like, let me just zoom that in. You can see they become very solid in their mass, and they can be trimmed. They take shearing real well, and so you can make them any shape you want to. So making it look like a wall is very easy to do. The Planning Commission felt that the requirements in the ordinance talk about screening the parking lot, but they can be done by various ways. Using plant material is also one way to screen the parking lot. In their recommendation to you, they felt this was also an appropriate revision to remove the brick wall from these two areas and allow that to become a privet hedge. In the recommendation, though, the Planning Commission asked that the plant material be 5 gallon and be placed at 3 foot on center rather than the 5 foot that the developer proposed in order to get a tighter hedge quicker. And so that was the recommendation there. The next item dealt with planters. One of the conditions, again, in the approval was that there be a planter box along the Grand Avenue, the 20th Street side of Building A. This gives you an example of what the proposal was from the developer that he submitted to the Planning Commission. As they tried to work out different designs, we looked at designs of a wall that would incorporate a planter. We looked at options of just having taller shrubs to become the wall. The problem was the dimension, though, from this space where this is where the doors were going to be to those patios, and that dimension space plus a wall that had a planter into it created problems of that door opening. And so the developer came back and asked the Planning Commission to consider an alternative to that requirement, and that was that they attach hanging planters to those rails that would be in front of the spaces on 20th Street. Again, the Planning Commission discussed this, and in their recommendation, the concern was maintenance of these because, again, you have various people in the units who may or may not take care of those planters in different ways, maybe a lack of continuity in plant material. So in the Planning Commission's recommendation, they said that these attached planters would be an acceptable solution given the physical dimensions, but that the apartment management would have to then take care of maintenance and watering these planters to make sure that they stay in good condition. Now, one of the things I need to point out, because I know this is a point of discussion in the work session, was the whole idea of what was originally approved besides these planters. In the original submittal back in September of last year, what was proposed was actually a metal finished screen wall for the patios on this portion of Building A. And then I'll go here and zoom this in. And then a brick wall for the patio areas. Oh, that's going out of focus. There we go. Up. There. And then a brick, it keeps going out, I won't point at it. And then a brick party wall along the patios for the other part of the building to match the architecture. So you'll have two different screen walls take place. This is how it was originally submitted back September of last year. Conditions were established to make it a planting wall. They came back, said that's not working, we'll hang planters from there. The Planning Commission's recommendation to you is to hang the planters there, but again, this, in the discussion of the work session, you talked about maybe even going back to what was the original proposal. And that's what this drawing illustrates. The fourth revision that is being proposed for your consideration tonight.
Can you review what actually we're looking at now?
Okay.
You talked about what was
So
proposed.
this is what was submitted back in September of 2013 and was originally approved with the condition that there be plantings on top of these walls. As they tried to look at those plantings and make it work, they couldn't get the dimensions to work to make the planter wall, so they came back and asked the commission to consider attached planters, which is what this drawing illustrates. You can see there on the edge, planters being attached to railings. So they submitted this to the Planning Commission as their revision, asking the Planning Commission to consider it. The Planning Commission recommended that this would be appropriate, that you see here, with those attached planters subject to the apartment taking over management of watering and planting these planters. In the work session, though, the discussion came about of going back to what had been originally submitted without the condition of making it a planter. So that's what I tried to show you is what.
So Greg, with that drawing, if it was, back to the original, just where you see that white planter,
You would have
it
a
could
brick
just be
wall
a,
that height.
a brick wall, and then it would be up to the apartment owner to maintain whatever they put there.
There'd be nothing else put there. There would
Because
not be any
that's
planter.
really one of the bigger concerns, is if you plant something there and make it so every plant had to be maintained by the apartment complex itself, it may not happen.
Right, and then if you look at, even on this building, there are two different designs to match the architecture. So this wall is actually a metal wall that doesn't have a real depth to it. I mean, it's kind of a metal screen. And so that became the other concern about, you've got two different types of screen walls on this one building. How do you make those things work? So if you go back to what you talked about in the work session of what was originally submitted, this is that blurred drawing that is still not clear, of giving you the idea of what had been originally submitted before the requirements of the changes.
Thank
So
you.
with the brick wall, it provides more privacy to that
Yeah.
unit?
It creates a separation between the sidewalk and the private patio. And it's a solid mass, so you're not looking, at the ground at the 4-foot height, much like the podium that you have here. Creates a solid screen so you can't see the kilt that you have. But you're worried. So that's the intent of having that solid item there.
Okay.
It's just to give some privacy and demarcation of private and public. The last item that then the Planning Commission was asked to consider was amending the requirement, and when I say requirement, in the original submittal, the drawings had shown balconies on the front and back of the buildings. So while it was not a design requirement in the design guidebook, because they submitted that way and it got approved that way, that then became a requirement. So what they're asking for is to remove the balconies on the back portions of the buildings, A, B, and B1. It just wants to play back and forth. I know, I don't know what it's doing either. So they're asking to take off the balcony requirement because of the submittal of B, B1, and A in the back portions that face the parking lot. So they're not design guideline requirements, but they were required because that's how they submitted and got approval for it. One of the questions you asked when we discussed this in the work session last week was then, what other things are they doing in terms of providing storage, amenities, and that type for the units? In their drawings, they are showing 42 storage units that are be in these three buildings. These are separate and apart from the units themselves. So 42 storage units, varying in size. The smallest being 4 by 6 by 4 by 9 foot tall. The biggest being 12, well, actually 8 by 8 by 9, and you have one that's 12 by 4, 6. So they got a variety of sizes for people to rent to store different items in. And so they are providing storage in the buildings themselves. The balconies also, more distracting than anything else. Okay. The balconies themselves on the front part of the street also could allow bicycles to be stored there, all there. One of the questions that came up then was with the balconies about the ability to maybe come outside to have fresh air. All the windows are operable in the buildings, and so they all can open to have fresh air in them also. So that's something we didn't know when we had our work session. We found out as we went through the plans and looked at that. So that was a couple questions you had that we've answered since our work session last time on this item. Planning Commission again recommended that the balconies not be required on the back areas of these buildings. The vote for these 4 items that I've explained last was 6-2. No, actually 6-1 on these items. These last 4 items. Again, recommending approval of the revisions proposed. So hopefully that explains what you're considering in terms of the design aspects of this buildings.
Does the balconies increase the value of the unit we're looking at, or does not having that balcony lessen the value?
Well, it's hard to say that there's a real value. It depends who wants that unit. We heard in the
For
work
taste.
session, if it was Janine renting that unit, that wouldn't make a difference. She did smell good. And so it's a mixed bag, because the other things that this project is offering, so they're offering balconies to the front units. They're offering actual storage units in addition to just what's in your apartment that other places don't offer. Building D actually has then a clubhouse area in it for the apartment area. So they also have another amenity in that they're offering in these units. A separate gathering place is found in Building D. So those variety of things, as you put them together, you could look at that package and say, okay, there are enough things to choose from that there's a value here, because it's just not one thing and everyone has to have that one thing. People can make those choices, just as well as in the unit sizes. There's 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units. So there's a variety of things. We've seen buildings that have no balconies on them that are built in the city, Colonial Court. We've seen buildings that have had kind of a fake balcony, Union Square, where you open the door, but there's really nothing to step out onto. Or we've seen buildings that have been built, such as in the Junction, that have balconies. Each one fits a market. Each one has its value, and each one has people who are interested in those. So I don't know that I'd say taking the balcony off itself takes the value away from the project, because I think there's enough variety of things being offered that there is value in the project.
That was one of the concerns of one of the commissioners.
There was.
Changes would lessen the value of the
Correct.
project.
Correct.
That's a valid concern.
Mm-hmm. It is. I mean, there is a cost associated with putting balconies in. And so if you're looking strictly at that cost, then you can say, okay, maybe it is lessening the value. But there's the other amenities and the other things people are looking for that also have a value to it. And this offers a variety of those values that people may be looking for. Any other questions? Or?
Any questions further? All right, thank you.
Maybe just one comment. I know we had a little bit of discussion about maybe encouraging bike racks of some sort, just because that's certainly a direction we want to go as a city, and it's in a very up-and-coming part of the community. So I think that's something we talked about, encouraging.
When actually talking to the developer about bike racks, they were talking about putting bike racks in addition in the back area. There's a kind of a back plaza patio area at this back entrance to the buildings. So we were talking about some bike racks there too, but we focus mainly on the tenants and where they put their bikes at nighttime.
Maybe I do have a question.
Great.
No, go ahead.
I do have a quick question, and it has to do with what if the developer gets halfway through this project and only 2 buildings go up? I mean, it's a pretty tight time frame, but only 2 buildings go up. Will there be will we require another builder or another developer to continue with the same plan design?
Well, let me address timing first, and then maybe that'll get to your question too. The plan calls for building A, B1, B, and D to begin construction at the same time. Early on, when we came to you last year, they were going to do one building at a time, but now, with the economy of scale, they figure if we start doing the footings of all these buildings now, because now all the drawings have been submitted for construction, that they'll begin all those 4 buildings at the same time, knowing that building A will take 2 or 3 months longer than building these buildings. So you'll have these buildings finish off probably within 12 months, and this within 14 to 15 months. So in reality, I don't see what's taking place, what you're talking about happening, because they're going to start all the footings, all the framing happening all at the same time on those buildings.
Plus they'll be getting financing for the entire project.
Yeah.
And the time frame shows that. I just wanted to
Yeah.
ask that question.
So,
With respects to balconies, in other developments, like for instance in the Junction, has there been any issues that the city has experienced because of balconies that we ought to be aware of or ought to be addressing?
We haven't seen any take
I
place.
understand they won't be having barbecues on there. I guess it's a fire issue.
Right.
That's the reason for that. But is there anything that cannot be stored there besides a barbecue?
I don't know that they have completed their documents of restrictions on what will be there. I just know that in talking with Soren, that they mentioned that bikes and other facilities they have are not restricted.
We're not going to be hanging our laundry out there or anything.
I don't think you'll be hanging on out there. One thing I ought to make mention too, because when we talk about balconies and their usefulness, for example, in the Junction, half the balcony is taken up by an air conditioning unit. Here, all those facilities are up on the rooftop. So it actually is full space rather than half it being an air conditioning unit on it.
Right.
So that's
nicer.
Yeah.
That's much nicer. Well, thank you.
What about Unit C? When is that scheduled to be?
Now, in the agreement, I think that is, I'm trying to remember, Brandon, was it 18 months after completion that it has to be completed? Started, okay. So there's a time frame on that then that has to start within 18 months after the completion of the other 4 buildings.
And those are townhomes?
Those are townhomes.
And so that would be the last unit to
Those will be the
come
last
in-
units built.
Come in.
In this, yeah.
I don't know if Brandon needs to address this, but what position does R&O have in this project?
Brandon, you want to come up?
Mostly golfing.
Golfing?
A lot of golfing. The question is, what position does R&O have in the project? Although they're not an equity partner as they were before, they still are very much a partner in the project. They will be contracted to do the work. They've been along with the developer this entire time in terms of staying engaged in meeting the deadlines that we've put out and those type of things. So they're very much still involved, and they'll be seeing the project through the end and meeting all the deadlines.
So they're the contractor that's building these units? then?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's great that we have a local developer.
It is great. Anything else?
Well, I just want to say that this project has to have the right value because it's closer to the central part of Ogden. And so we need to keep the value in this project that will attract the type of people that are going to live there to add more value to our city. And that's my concern, is that I hope we can keep the value to that point.
And I think we share in that concern. Obviously, this project's been a long time coming, and so we feel that with R&O and their integrity in construction and the history that they have in the community, and with some of the design changes, that the value is still there The exterior finish materials are such that it'll read really well from the street. There are balconies that still do face the street. And with some of the amenities, like Greg mentioned with the storage and those type of things, you won't find that in other complexes in the city. And so I think all of those things together will drive value, quality of construction and amenities and finishes.
Bike racks.
Thanks, Brandon. We do have our developer here. Would you like to speak to this?
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and for all that you guys have done. We've been involved in the project for almost 2 years now. My name is Soren Halliday. I work with PEG Development, 180 North University Avenue, Suite 200, Provo, Utah. And I know that it's been we recognize that there's been significant and heartfelt design and efforts and energy by all members of City Council, Planning Commission, members of staff, and the entire Ogden City. And as we've learned more, and as we continue to learn more and more about what efforts have been put into it, we appreciate that very much. We're grateful that we're to this point now. I think we've come through. We've only again been involved for a couple of years, but we know that you've been involved for almost, I think, around 10 years or so, and so this is a momentous occasion, I think. So our investors are excited. We have our investors are coming up tomorrow to not only to visit with the mayor, but to also tour the temple. And they're excited for what's happening here in downtown. We are, as being developers, we have also a huge investment in the Ogden Summit Hotel, which is being converted to the Marriott. And so whenever we bring in out-of-state investors into downtown Ogden, they are amazed with what is happening in the downtown area, as are we. We are impressed, and we're heavily invested in the downtown. And so we want the downtown area to succeed, I think, just as much, hopefully just as much as you do. So we're grateful for that. What's happening with the park in that area as well. I was telling Brandon and Greg today and the administration that we're very, very impressed with what's happening in the park across the river from there. Every time I drive by, I see a bunch of kids and people playing there, and it's very well populated, and there's a lot of energy in that area. And so we hope that this project continues to add to that. We believe some of the items that we're putting on the exteriors and the interiors will create that awareness that this is a great project, that there's a lot of value in this, and will drive that value. So with the future phases, we'll bring the type of people into that downtown area that Ogden wants to be there. So we appreciate all the suggestions and all the help and everything that you guys have provided. And Greg and Brandon have been very helpful, and as many others have. So we appreciate that. So
all right, thank you
very much.
We'd like to accept any public input on this. Anyone else like to speak to this? Okay. What's the pleasure?
Well, let's start with number 1, 3A1, proposed resolution 2014-14, and I'll make a motion that we approve this amendment for the transfer agreement.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Board Member Garner, seconded by Board Member White, to adopt proposed resolution 2014-14. This is a roll call vote.
Board Member Garner.
Aye.
Board Member Stevens.
Aye.
Board Member White.
Aye.
Board Member Blair.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gochner.
Aye.
Chair Heyer.
Aye, that passes.
I'll go ahead and take a stab at this very long next one. I move to adopt Resolution 2014-13, amending Exhibit C1 of the Mixed Use Zone Master Development Agreement as recommended by the Planning Commission, with the exception that a brick wall surrounding the basement patios without a planter will be installed as originally proposed by the developer.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Vice Chair Gochner, seconded by Board Member Blair, to adopt Resolution 2014-13. And this is also a roll call vote.
Board Member Stevens?
Aye.
Board Member White?
Aye.
Board Member Blair?
Aye.
Board Member Garner?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gochner?
Aye.
Chair Hire.
Aye. That also passes. All right, well, good luck. We hope that goes well for you, and we're looking forward to a great project. Appreciate you being on the project with us. Okay, the next item is public comments. This is an opportunity to address the board regarding your concerns or ideas for the Ogden Redevelopment Agency. Please state your name and address clearly for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Seeing no movement. RDA Executive Director?
Yeah, before they get up and go, I'd like to personally thank Soren from PEG and Dale from RNO. This has been a couple of years of major commitment, vision, and we really appreciate you being in our community, the projects you've picked up, and your willingness to work with us on all kinds of things. You've been fantastic partners, and we can't thank you enough for that, so thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Board members?
Second what the mayor said, and thanks to
Yeah, I do
having
too.
a local company be a
Yep.
big participant in this.
Nice.
It's refreshing to get to this point. It was a long road, and I think we've aged over the 10 years, but I still believe that this can be an element in our city which will continue with the growth and development that we want to have here in Ogden, and it's a key factor. And so the value has to be there, and I think we have that type of a situation.
Yeah, the transformation of that particular piece of property from what it was to what it will be is going to make a huge difference in our downtown. Excited to have it moving forward. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
A motion by Board Member or Vice Chair Gochner and seconded by Board Member Garner for adjournment. All in favor?
Aye.
Just as a reminder, there will be a City Council joint work session immediately following this meeting, and the items to discuss will be on the agenda.